Good morning. This is Vicki Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Alliance of Disability Advocates, and October is Disability Employment Awareness Month, and I'm here with two of my colleagues, Sydney Breslow and Ashley Large. Sydney, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Sydney Breslow, and Information and Referral Services Manager at Alliance of Disability Advocates. I have Mitochondrial Disorder, which affects my balance, vision, speech, and walking.
Thank you. Ashley?
I'm Ashley Large. I'm a community inclusion specialist at Alliance of Disability Advocates. I have cerebral palsy. And I've been working here for 2 years.
Thank you. So a lot of people may not know, but Disability Employment Awareness Month has been around for over 20 years. And the goal of this month is to really highlight why employing people with disabilities is not just a good thing to do, but that it actually benefits both the employer and the employee, and we just thought we'd share some personal experiences. So I'm just curious, Ashley, why do you think Disability Employment Awareness Month is important?
It's very important to have help people with disabilities be included in the workplace. From the time we are toddlers, people ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you reinforce that idea as an adult. You work but so many times people with disabilities are discriminated against with employment. So this month is good for helping bridge that gap. By helping inform employees about the abilities of people with disabilities. And for helping them be included in society with employment.
Sydney, what do you think?
I completely agree, actually. So the U.S. Department of Labor put out statistics in 2020, last 2020, about the amount of people with disabilities that were employed. 17.9% of people with disabilities were employed in 2020, compared with 68.1% of people without disabilities. That is a staggering statistic that shows that there need to be changes in employer in the workplace and employing people with disabilities.
Yeah, it has taken a long time since the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act to, and we're still struggling to kind of break that barrier. The ADA gives us rights and removes some barriers, but still there's a stigma attached to disability.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have any personal experience as applying for a job that, or interviewing or something where your disability was considered a liability? Sydney, do you want to start?
Sure. So before I got my job at ADA, which is about in 2016, I was interviewing for jobs, and I had 15 interviews. I have a master's degree in special education, so I was applying for mostly teaching jobs. And one instance when I felt discrimination was I went to an interview with a principal and a teacher, and the principal, as soon as I started talking, the principal walked out of the room and never came back. She said that she had to go take care of something in the school, but I emailed her and asked her if she had any questions for me since she wanted to interview. Never heard back from her. Emailed her again when I inquired if I got a job or not, just out of principle. Never heard back from her. So and I think people with disabilities have insecurity just like everybody does, and that interview really made me insecure about my disability, but I immediately associated it to her leaving the room to my speech impairment, because as soon as I started talking, she left the room. And so and so it just made me more insecure about taking a job, which in turn made me more nervous about interviewing, which in turn made my speech first interview. So it's like it's a vicious cycle. So yeah, that's my story.
Ashley, what about you?
I agree. It is a vicious cycle.
I wanted to
I've always wanted to work in the disability community.
After school, yeah.
And after school, it took me 5 years. And I interviewed in 4 different states. And I was under the impression that I would face less barriers because of the field that I was going into.
To help people with disabilities.
My chosen job path being to help people with disabilities. Unfortunately, that was not what I found. My worst, my most challenging experience was at a job interview.
It was a food a week job
Was a 15-hour-a-week job at a nursing home as an activities coordinator. I was significantly overqualified, but I just wanted to get any experience I could. And to establish employment history. And so I went into their lobby and waited for their HR person to come out. And when she came to get me, she stopped. And she just stared at me, and so I had to prompt her. I asked, are you the person that I'm supposed to be meeting? And then I introduced myself, and she still just stared at me. So I asked her if she wanted to go to her office, where we were going to do the interview. And she snapped back. She snapped out of it finally and agreed. So I followed her to her office. Where all she did was read my resume back to me. She never asked me any questions. After she finished reading my resume back to me, she started to wrap up. So I interrupted her and I asked, "Do you have any questions for me?" And she said no, and that was the whole interview. It's weird. And And the thing that I took away from all my interviews is the looks on the faces of everyone giving me an interview. And you could just tell in the pit of your stomach, I'm not getting this job. But I would fight the whole interview and advocate for myself. In the hopes that I could make a connection and show them that I am capable of this job. That's my long story.
Thankful. I think you forgot the word painful.
Exactly.
Painful for you. It was painful for me to listen to that story, both of your stories, because I work with you, and I know the difference that you have made in the lives of so many people. Their loss was clearly our gain. And one of the things that we hope by having this conversation and sharing our experiences is that maybe we can help people understand and see what people can do and stop focusing on maybe the fact that they do those things differently.
Exactly.
But what do you think that mainstream employers need to learn then about hiring? I mean, this is kind of an opportunity to hopefully get them to listen a little bit longer. Sydney, you want to go?
Absolutely. So I think the hardest part about having a job or getting a job is the interview process, because my resume looks like I don't have disability. Like the resume doesn't tell the whole story. And so they look at your resume and calling you in for interview, they're not expecting you to have disability usually. So it can be a shock, I guess. So I guess it can be a shock. But I think the most important part is giving them a fair chance. Listening to them and saying, I'm gonna give this person a fair chance to interview them like anybody else, and then after that you can make your judgment and make your decision. But give them a fair chance and listen to what they have to say. They come a lot to your company, a lot of personality to the company, contribute so much to your company. So just give them a chance. That's all you have to do is give them a chance.
And listen. I mean, really
Exactly.
listen.
Exactly.
And to see you.
Exactly.
What you're capable of.
I have two more points. People with disabilities can be the hardest workers because they feel like they have to prove themselves. So like they can work. This is, I think this is actually done in research. I read something about this morning that people with disabilities are hard workers because they feel like they have to prove themselves to the employer and the company that they're worthy of being there, which is sad but true. So you could begin the hardest worker that you've ever had by hiring someone with a disability. And finally, review the Americans with Disabilities Act, because you want to know what questions you can and cannot ask. I've had people ask me inappropriate questions in interviews. It's very uncomfortable. So if you educate yourself, you can make the interview process smoother, and you can also follow the law, because it's a law. So you want to make sure that you're following the law so that you don't have bad repercussions if you do not follow the law. So those are my 3 points, and just give them my final point. Just give them a chance. That's all you have to do.
So, one of the things I've found when we post a position, and we post positions out there in the mainstream, that I actually sometimes have to put in the cover letter, it's like having a disability is considered a plus,
Yeah.
and it's I tried to do it a little bit more subtly, but sometimes I thought I was too subtle. You know, we say personal experience with people with disabilities is considered a plus. That was too vague. So now I'm just as like, I want to hire people with disabilities. And I'm going to wait and see, because as you both know, we're hiring. And I might have to start, add a phrase to that. I want to hire people with disabilities and we have jobs open.
Yeah.
So that people know that it's a safe space. What advice do you have for employers, Ashley?
It goes with what you guys have said. I know this is generic and overused, but always keep an open mind. People are people, period. Someone might have, when you're interviewing someone, someone might have a disability that you can see. But an able-bodied person might have strengths or not have strengths in the same way. But you can't see that in their interview. And so everyone has things that they're good at and things that they might need an accommodation for. And a good employer does that anyway, where they play towards their employees' strengths. Because even if there is a shock factor, that's just something that they need to keep in mind, and they should learn about people with disabilities. Because the more you learn about topics, the less foreign they seem. So just have awareness and open-mindedness.
So,
Oh, Vicki,
yes,
do you want to answer some of these questions?
sure. Have at me. Which one?
Sydney,
Okay. Our first question is, what advice would you give another employer about hiring people with disabilities?
So, it's interesting in the disability arena, when we talk about housing and building new buildings, we talk about that if you approach everything with an eye towards accessibility, so then you don't have to worry about someone coming with a wheelchair that you didn't know was using the wheelchair, and that has to do with like physical structures. But I think that that employers should really also approach their interviews with the same way, kind of universal question. So the first strategy or a strategy that I like to ask, and Sydney didn't get interviewed by me, but Ashley did, and I don't know if I asked her this question, but I try to ask now every potential employee or new hire a question that somehow gets to, what do you need to be successful? Because if we're hiring and we want to hire people for a job, we need to know what they think their needs are, what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And I think I also asked those questions. But really, if we said, what do you need to be successful? And you pay attention to what they say, then, and it's the goal of the employer to have every employee succeed in their job. And we should, because that cuts down on overhead. We don't have vacancies. We don't have to constantly be training new employees. That would be a key. And then you have to think about how much flexibility a particular job has. So probably, it wouldn't be that Ashley would not make a successful dentist, for example, because it would be hard for her to hold the tools. And I don't know about you, but when I go to the dentist, I'm always impressed with how many things that they can do with their hands in a tiny little space. But so you think about, where do you have flexibility? And if you don't, then you say you don't. Or if you're unsure, then you ask the person, well, this job requires you to do a lot of travel. So how would you do that? Ashley, I think we asked you a question. What would you do if you went to a consumer's house and they had stairs and no ramp? What would you do?
did.
I did. And she had a question for it, and it answered the question, and so that was no longer a barrier. So I think that, another example that I was thinking of as I was preparing for this, it's like, if the job requires an employee to thread a needle and the applicant says they cannot, then you have to think about what would be a reasonable accommodation. And you can have that conversation with the applicant. You could say, well, but this job really requires you to be able to thread a needle. Do you have a suggestion about how you would go about doing that? And in some cases, you know, for someone who has visual impairment, it would be getting a big what do you call them?
Monitor?
A spyglass kind of thing, so that it blows up the picture and then you can do it, which as I age, I now need in order to thread a needle. So doing those kind of things can often result in a solution that no one ever thought of before. So you have to be creative. But sometimes, you know, here's another one. A job might require communicating with people. Well, for me, that's talking. But for someone else, someone who is deaf, they have a way of doing that would help them. And so employers don't have to be the expert, but they can ask those open-ended questions. This job requires X. How would you do that? And I think that some employers are afraid to ask those questions because they might think that they're inappropriate. But if the person is applying for the job, you get to ask those questions. So, and there are various tools and accommodations, and people without disabilities also require accommodations. You know, so just be open about it, and not be afraid to answer that question, because you guys probably already have the answers.
Can I have one thing here?
Yeah.
So me and actually disabilities are very physical, they're very obvious, so we kind of have to, we have to address that open in the room when we go into the interview, because you can't really hide it. But people with mental health issues or autism or disabilities are gonna have to not disclose disability in the interview because you don't have to, it's not obvious to you. So they might disclose ask for reasonable accommodation after they get a job, which is completely fine. That's their decision. So I just want to make that clear that most people or some people don't have to disclose a disability in the interview. So
Right. No, you don't have to, but if your disability is also sitting there in the interview with you,
yes,
it seems like that's the best thing to do.
exactly.
And if you want an accommodation, you have to disclose your disability, because we can't guess. Although I do sometimes do some guessing and planning, but yeah. And go ahead.
No, you go. I was gonna ask that question, so you go ahead.
Another question.
Oh,
I wanted to ask something too.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to add something.
Oh. Or just not want to is yeah,
Employers are, whether or not
they're afraid to ask.
whether or not they're afraid to ask about disabilities for the legal reasons, or if they are worried about offending someone.
I think it's not a good practice to incorporate this technically
I think it's a good idea to incorporate those types of questions into your interviews with everyone.
not require you to do this task.
Like this job requires you to do this task.
How would the format what would looking at this situation
So how would you do that, or how would you handle this situation?
that this that quality of all good people.
That way you could see the potential quality of, or you could evaluate the quality of all potential employees. And it also helps people with disabilities. It so it's a win-win situation in that it makes people with disabilities comfortable, but also it also tells you a lot about any applicant.
Mhm. Well, and
Exactly.
I think that's one reason why I try to ask people what they need in order to be successful. Because that might, the answer to that might not have anything to do with a disability, but it also frequently does, and it creates an opportunity to have a discussion. Yeah, I
Exactly.
agree. I agree.
You ready for the next question?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you feel? I'm sorry. What do you feel the company advantages of being a candidate with a disability or hiring? I'm sorry. Let me start over. What do you feel are the company advantages of hiring a candidate with a disability?
Yeah. So we you all already talked about. One is that without classifying people with disabilities in a large group, is that if you, because of the history of discrimination, frequently, and both of you mentioned this, based on prior interviews, when you came in to an interview and someone didn't see your disability as a weakness, but maybe as a strength, or something that would help you do your job better, they're going to work really hard because you gave them an opportunity. And because discrimination is unfortunately alive and well out there, you don't necessarily want to lose the job once you got it, so you're going to work really hard to do that. So some of that's motivation. I think there's something else. There's been a lot of conversation recently about diversity and equality and inclusion. And those words mean lots of different things to lots of different people. But all three of those words also define and include people with disabilities. So diversity, disability doesn't necessarily discriminate based on the color of someone's skin. We know that, so that's a factor. We also know that access to adequate or not having access to good health care sometimes makes a disability worse. And I think what everybody wants is equality. I mean, we want the disability community wants to be treated just like everybody else, with accommodations that are sometimes necessary to do that. And then the key word is inclusion. And I think that's what the Americans with Disabilities Act really says, kind of broadly, is if we build barrier-free communities, buildings, buses, all of those things, then it's then there is an opportunity to be included. If you, if a place is inaccessible, then you are automatically excluded just by structure alone. So I think those are the big reasons to me that it would be an advantage.
Perfect, thank you. So those are all the questions I have. You already answered third question, sort of. So I'm gonna ask you a third question. Because you already answered throughout the
Oh,
presentation.
go ahead and ask me, because maybe I have a different answer than I
Okay.
wrote down.
Can you explain a bit about reasonable accommodation and how that process works at Alliance of Disability Advocates?
Yeah, so I mean, I did answer it. It really is making the assumption that everybody is going to need some type of accommodation in employment. And for people living with a disability, it's primarily their disability, but sometimes it's also single parents needing accommodation in terms of their hours, or someone who's taking care of an elder person in their home, or taking care of someone with a disability in their home. They don't have one, but they might need an accommodation. So I think it goes into what do you need to be successful in creating an opportunity for people to say, well, you know, if you really want me to do this job well, these are the things it's going to need. And it could be something as simple. When I started in this job, I have a cell phone. I am an Android user. I don't know anything about Apple. And somebody handed me an Apple and said, here's your new cell phone. Well, that's why I still am using my personal phone, because I don't know how to use an Apple and I'm too old to make the transition. So it could be something as simple as that, you know, is what are your preferences? And, you know, unfortunately, we live in an Android world and we live in an iPhone world. But that's an example, I think.
Thank you.
So, you know, this has been a great conversation, I think. I really want to thank both of you for taking the time. You know, this is 20 years of really looking at, I think it was the Office of Disability Employment Policy in the Department of Labor 20 years ago started looking at October as Disability Employment Awareness Month. And I just want to say that the Americans with Disabilities Act has provided us with some powerful tools that protects people with disabilities when seeking employment and requires reasonable accommodations to be on the job. But first you have to get the interview. And I think that's what I really want to take home, is you cannot make assumptions based on what you think you know about an individual. And for us here at Alliance of Disability Advocates, this is really our mission. Our mission is to be at the forefront of hiring people with disabilities. And that's not just a requirement. It's one of the best ways we can do our jobs. Because one of the things that we've learned is that that there's peer support, and sometimes peer support comes from a person who looks like you or who has the same disability as you. And sometimes we find that that cross disability peer support is also pretty important, so that someone can look at another individual and think, well, you know, if Sydney can do it, or if Ashley can do it, then I can do it too. So that positive role models, I think it's really important. So, and we kind of utilize kind of a Me Too movement, you know, me too. I have a disability. I have a disability and I work. I have a disability and I run an agency that helps support people with disabilities, but you can't see my disability, but it's there. And sometimes it's very real. So I think this is why Disability Awareness Month is so important. And I want to thank you both for having this conversation with me.
Thank you. It's very meaningful.
Thank you, Vicki.
You're welcome. And for more information about hiring people with disabilities, go to our website. And if you're seeing this, you're already on our website. Look for the, unless you're seeing it on our Facebook, and that might be where you see it. But go to the website and there'll be some resources about hiring people with disabilities. Thank you for taking the time to watch this.